Good morning. I'm Archbishop Philip Freier, and welcome to this breakfast conversation on this important topic, fighting crime's vicious circle. And I'm joining you today on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to respect the people who have carried the sovereignty and the custodianship of these lands over so many generations, for the elders in the past, in our present time, and those who emerge to carry on this trust. Let's start with this prayer in the Woi Wurrung language of the Wurundjeri people. Well, I'm glad to be joined today here in this virtual space by two people I think who will be able to really add some important dimensions to our topic. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Amanda George. Hello, Amanda. Amanda's joining us from the Surf Coast, where with her partner and her two children, she's doing some homeschooling. So we hope that you have a good day. Some of us will know what that experience is like. And Amanda's been a lawyer and a prison activist since the early 1980s. And in 1988, with four other women, founded Flat Out Incorporated, a statewide women's post-release and advocacy service. She's written and campaigned around the use of strip searches, private prisons, women's incarceration, prison abolition, and family violence. She's on the Victorian Women's Honour Roll, was awarded a Churchill Fellowship, a Centenary Medal, the Vida Goldstein Award, and the Avon Women's Spirit of Achievement Award. And I think you can just understand by some of those matters of advocacy that Amanda's been in, some of the things that we will cover off on today. So welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Archbishop. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm participating in the forum today on Wurrung country.
And Paul McDonald, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Anglicare Victoria. It's the state's largest provider of foster care, family welfare and youth support services, and Paul is the founding chair of Home Stretch, which we might learn a little bit more about this morning. Before this, he was Deputy Secretary of the Children, Youth and Family Division of the Department of Human Services in the Victorian Government, and he had the responsibilities for those areas of child protection, youth justice and family and domestic violence programs in that role. Paul's chaired a range of nationally significant committees on behalf of the Australian Government, including a committee into petrol sniffing, and is the former chair of the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. Paul has had a number of awards, and in 2020, he won the National Pro Bono Influencer Award for his role in driving that Home Stretch campaign. And in 2017, Paul was awarded the prestigious Robin Clark Leadership Award, the state's most celebrated Children's Protection Award that recognises a leader who inspires others about achieving the best outcomes for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children, young people and their families. And he's also the patron of the National Youth Workers Association. And welcome. I understand there's about 180 people who've registered this morning, so we're glad you can all join in. And we're holding up the image of Federation Square as we can behind us, just in memory for those of you who are the regular attenders there, but we've had in all the circumstances and the importance of this topic, the need to do this in this format. There will be an opportunity of interacting as we normally have. If you're new to one of these conversations, there will be at the end a space where some of the concerns or questions you have can be raised. And if you can find on your computer screen at the bottom, certainly is on mine, there's something called Q&A, and you can go into that, click on that, and you can type in there your questions, and I'll be watching those and group those together as I'm able towards the end. So please do that as ideas occur to you on the way through. Well, we all know that there's been a growth of prisons just driving up in the Western Highway. You can't help but have seen over the last decade the growth of the big prison complex at Ravenhall. I think in the last 10 years, we've had several elections which have had broadly a a law and order focus or a tough on crime focus. And I think that's been probably responsible for driving the growth of the prison system. But Amanda, are we just seeing a growth in capacity, or are we actually seeing a growth in the quality of what is offered, both in prisons in their physical form and in the programs that they have?
Look, I think that probably what happens inside prisons, in terms of programs and things like that, is better than it was 20 years ago. But what's driving the increase is, if we have a look at how much money the Victorian government have been spending on social and public housing, education, public hospitals, in the last 6 years, social and public housing's gone up 1%, education's increased 25%, public hospitals 48%, and prisons 90%. So it's been a truism, basically, ever since there have been prisons, is the more prisons you build, they always get filled. And what courageous and sensible social policy is about actually looking at the drivers for crime. Even Deborah Glass, the Ombudsman, said that we can't keep spending and dropping all of this money into prisons when the system, the correction system, is not making the community safe. We look at the United States, one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. They are not the safest place to live. So what needs to happen is we need a transference of government spending into, I hate to call it crime prevention, because really it's social and community support. It's housing, it's education, it's support for marginalised people, and it's addressing laws that are feeding the prison system. So, for example, the bail law.
We might come back to that, Amanda, in a bit of detail. Can I just turn now to Paul? We've heard a couple of times me mention this home stretch campaign. Paul, this is something I know that was something you were very passionate about, because it concerned young people in residential care. And just tell us what the advocacy was about and how it feeds into our discussion this morning about the improving the pathways of young people who are in residential care.
Yeah, thanks, Archbishop. And I'm on Wurundjeri country, by the way, so I want to pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Look, interestingly, internationally, well, first of all, Homestretch is about campaigning to the state on child welfare to say that let's stop this sort of yesterday Dickensian thinking that care provided to a child in out-of-home care ends from the state's perspective at 18, that it needs to go through to, at least, as Homestretch argues, at least 21, that the state needs to raise these children up through 21, very much like 85% of any other 18 to 21-year-old in Australia who's still with one or both parents, Archbishop. Let's take, for example, in the United Kingdom. They had care leavers leaving at 18 under foster and residential and kinship care. And what they found that, in fact, 70% of their youth, young people between 18 and 21 in youth detention were in fact actually had a child protection background, were care leavers. And they said, along with a number of other observations on homelessness, on hospitalisations, on a range of things, young people struggled coming out of the care system. So the UK, United States, Europe, New Zealand all decided in varying parts over the last 10 years to extend that care to 21. And what they have found is that they've halved the homeless rates for this cohort. And that's very significant, Archbishop, because they make up 2/3 of the youth homeless population care leavers do. They doubled their education and employment rates. And in fact, on the very topic that we're talking about, they actually reduced this cohort's conviction rate and likely arrest rate by 41%, all simply by providing continued supported care through to 21. Extraordinary. And so here in Australia, up to recently, we had the same system where the state care system would say, hey, First of all, we'll go into your home. If we're very concerned about the care you're receiving by the parents, there could be abuse and neglect, we'll remove you from that situation to make you safe and well. We'll place you into foster care or kinship care. Oh, and by the way, the deal's over once you turn 18. Well, in fact, what we do know is the deal is not over as parents, that we've got to keep on investing in these young people. So what's been remarkable here in Victoria, for example, and we've got 6 states and territories now embracing this reform and now offering extended care to 21. And here in Victoria, exactly the same, motivated, the government motivated by wanting better housing outcomes for this group, but also wanting to reduce juvenile justice presentations of young people from the child protection background, have introduced extended care for all young people. No, there's no capping here, all young people through to 21, regardless of whether you're in kinship care, foster care, or residential care, or even permanent care. It's a fantastic result, and I think it'll have an impact on some of the incarceration and remand rates amongst which are too high for those with child protection histories that we do see in youth justice.
Thanks, Paul. And Amanda, you were touching on a number of factors, but do you want to open up some other, what do you think are some of the contributing causes that lead people into the criminal justice system? Because we know from evidence that people who are incarcerated often have lower levels of literacy, perhaps lower levels of historic participation in the workforce and other factors like that. Are there some other things which are, as you were touching on, the investments in social policy that would seem to have a suggestion of an influence on lowering incarceration rates?
If we're talking about women prisoners, and some research came out this week looking at men as well, with women prisoners, overwhelmingly, women have experienced sexual abuse and family violence in the home as young people. And I think it's probably very clear that if you scratch the surface of the men's prison population, you would find a very similar experience. The majority of, about a third of women who are in prison were in foster care or were adopted when they were children. So generally people are in foster care because their home circumstances have meant that it's an untenable situation, may well be poverty, may well be violence, may well be sexual abuse, may well be unstable housing. So one of the really contributing factors is, what have been the social circumstances for your first 10 years? Now, instability around housing is key, because if there's instability in housing, there's instability in schooling, there's instability in friendship groups, there's instability in family relations, there's instability in access to community support. And it's that instability that is a real trigger for falling over. At the other end, when women are leaving prison, it's exactly the same issue. It's about not having housing stability when you get out. The biggest predictor of reoffending for women when they get out of prison is whether they have housing stability and a support base in that first 2 years of getting out. And research in New South Wales has shown that if you have more than 2 changes of address in your first year out, you are basically on your way back into prison. And so this is why there's been a significant campaign called Homes Not Prisons, that a group of criminalised women who have been inside have very much developed and who are pushing at the moment, and who are saying to the Andrews government, you're about to spend $189 million on 106 cells for women at Deer Park. Now that $189 million could be 1,000 public homes. And the funding to support those 106 cells could actually support 1,600 public homes. So it's really important that the focus is on building homes, not building prisons. That will impact on young people and children and their future, and it will impact on women who are already criminalised and caught up in the system and their future and the future of their children. Because if you're a woman leaving prison, you have got no chance of getting your children back unless you have got stable housing and support. And if those children go into the out-of-home care system, as Paul said, their trajectory is very, very marginal.
Well, Paul, I just really want to turn, I suppose, to the family support work that you're involved in. How much do you encounter that kind of family support of people in some of the circumstances that Amanda's describing, either people leaving prison? What sort of supports are there through our current programs to help people get their family life and their relationships and the stability of their accommodation back?
Well, we've certainly seen some good progress of late over the last couple of years. Maybe COVID related, maybe about just trying to drive a better option for young people in particular and prisoners exiting. Now, the government's announced a $5 billion housing package, and within that, when you start having a look at, it's made some good inroads, I'd have to say, in the homeless to hotel. I mean, I think there's about 2,400 homeless people now sitting in hotels as a result of this lockdown, which is remarkable. And, you know, a further, a couple of thousand packages to move those into sort of permanent housing. So we know that we can do this and do this well. So we should take confidence about that we can start making these sort of, we're docking in quite a strong pathway from homelessness, hotel, into ongoing housing. So where we need to start thinking about, well, what are the other cohorts that could actually benefit from this really hard and locked in pathway out? And I think prisoners coming out, we know a third of prisoners who go in, Archbishop, are in fact homeless. So they're charged, but they're entering already homeless. And about half of those exit homeless. Where's my options? We've seen a couple of good options starting to, the old Maribyrnong Detention Centre, which started to take prisoners out and place them into some housing, which was quite an effective model. Kids Undercover, which are picking up the youth justice with nearly 100 studios available to be placed in backyards or in properties. Specifically for the youth justice clientele. So we're starting to, but where I think the issue for the needs of can I use the youth and young adult population of coming out of prison or even preventing them going in, Archbishop, is in fact actually, I think we know what to do. I think the issue is about our preparedness to scale. So it's not necessarily about, oh, let's look around for the innovative ideas or the models. We've got Village 21. I've talked about Kids Undercover, other housing. We've talked about homeless hotels, or even support, as you ask, around families with a range of new and interesting interventions that actually bring the family around the offender. And what we've seen with those interventions is that we've reduced recidivism by 60%. And in fact, the little brothers and sisters, part of that family intervention, don't go on and offend themselves. We're looking at big brother and mum and dad and how the family's working out. So what I'm saying is, I think we know in this state what to do. I think it's about a belief of let's scale, let's invest in some of these community-based options, these pathways out, and take confidence that that the evidence that we've seen in these trials will in fact scale into larger outcomes across the community.
I think that's why I think it's important to have this kind of a conversation this morning, because sometimes our public debate is a very polarized debate, and it's often fairly strident around issues that people might feel quite emotionally connected if they hear in the news about a particular case. And some of the big outcomes do need this kind of longer commitment and this greater sense of well, being in there for a long haul. So, Amanda, you'd mentioned a bit earlier the impact of bail laws. Would you like to just walk us through what the impact of that is on in your experience, the rate of people being imprisoned?
Sure. I just want to go back to something Paul said about the Homeless to Hotels program, which flat out was, you know, working with women who were involved in that. And it showed the possibility of opportunity and success, that providing people are given accommodation which is not in a rooming house, because a lot of rooming houses are very unsafe places for women, very unsafe. And they're also full of people who have got, you know, drug and alcohol issues, ice issues, mental health issues, very hard place to stay. So the Homeless to Hotel was great because it provided long-term support for people. And that is the key. It's about having someone behind you in case you fall, someone walking next to you to take you through to Centrelink, to getting ID, to finding a doctor who will bulk bill. So you're quite right, Archbishop. It's about the programs have been successful. They don't have to be new and innovative. They can just be, let's put money where it's shown that this keeps people safe, off the streets and out of prison. The bail laws have basically been changed pretty much in response to the Burke Street incident. There was the Burke Street, we all know about that, but what the government did is it reversed the onus. So the onus is on the person to show that they should get bail. Now, what that means is that in the last 5 years, 5 years ago, the women's prison population, a quarter of them were on remand, which means they were unsentenced. Now, 44%, almost half of the women in prison are there on remand. Now, those women are often not there for very long. Like 2/3 of the cycling of women in and out of prison are there for what, less than 1 month. But what can happen in 1 month if you're inside is not something that's very easy to come back from. You can lose your housing. You can lose your children. You certainly lose your job. Your children lose their pets. Your children lose their school. So your whole life is catastrophized, really, because you weren't able to get bail. And if a person is homeless or a person has experienced family violence and they're out of their home, it's very difficult to get bail. So basically, the remand numbers are a creature of policy, and we need to wind back because they're not making the community safer. It's not good public policy to change a law on the basis of one tragic case. Governments have to be braver than that. They have to look at really what is going to be the benefit to the community of us spending all of this money, keeping women in for sentences for 1 month, money that could well be spent in providing good housing and support. So thinking about creatures of policy, if we have a look at the drunkenness laws, now, finally this year, after 30 years since the Royal Commission, it really was the family of Tanya Day, that the woman who was picked up, intoxicated and died in custody, Indigenous woman, you're the woman I recall. Her death absolutely changed the debate in Victoria, but it was because her family pushed and pushed and pushed. So decriminalising drunkenness will mean so many more lives are saved. There are plenty of people in the community who aren't even intoxicated, but who have medical conditions where they look intoxicated. If they're Aboriginal, the assumption will be that they're intoxicated and they will get locked up. And this criminalisation, I don't want to take up all the time, Archbishop, but just thinking about the criminalisation of Aboriginal people in our community, I just want people to consider, if the MCG was full of non-Aboriginal women and the prison van came to lock them up, there would be 24 non-Indigenous women locked up. if the MCG was full of Aboriginal women, 453 First Nations women would be taken to prison. So that is a massive overrepresentation, which speaks of disadvantage, poverty, racism, housing insecurity. It's not anything to do with Aboriginal people. It's to do with the systems that exist and the impact they have on Aboriginal people.
No, I think that's a point well made, Amanda. The Anglican Church has of course, had involvement in chaplaincy in institutions from the earliest time of, I guess, the colony being organised in the way it has been, and it's always been an important priority. And I know that that our compared to some other states, even our chaplaincy ministry is not as supported as it is in New South Wales, where there's a really strong support for by government for people to provide this kind of walking alongside people who are in prison. But I know that our chaplains really seeing the need of people inside, they would resonate entirely with the things that are being said here. And so there's a program they've developed called Get Out for Good. But I know it really struggles to gain institutional support or support from the increasingly privatized prison system. So I think anyone who is involved at all in sharing the lives of prisoners on the daily basis while they're incarcerated really sees and would resonate very strongly with the importance of the things that follow the post-release kind of experience, the integration into a community, the restoration of relationships, and all of the factors that are involved there. So where do you think we can get some policy courage about this? How can we move those numbers? And I was really struck by those numbers you mentioned, Amanda. 1% up to 90% of the different sorts of areas of growth. How can we get some better policy outcomes? Where's that going to come from? Paul, you know how government works. Tell us how to do it.
No, it's no, I don't, folks. I don't pretend to know government. Thanks, Archbishop. But anyway, but you do work with government, and it is important to continue to have the dialogue with government. I think that's important. That we're persistent in our dialogue about what could be better. We're introducing options that in fact actually have a community investment or community orientated approach to the same young offenders or adult offenders. It's interesting. I would start on a couple of things, Archbishop. Amanda's talked about remand. I mean, we have had a remand surge, if I put, it's not necessarily an incarceration problem necessarily. I'd have to argue. I'd call it a remanding problem. I mean, when you have a look at, of all prisoners in this state, 35% are unsentenced. When you have, Amanda said, around 50% of women. I can tell you that 60% of young people in detention are unsentenced. And in fact, 2/3, when they get to go to court to hear what they've got, 2/3 don't receive a custodial sentence. What we do know is the higher likelihood of someone re-entering a prison is because of their experience in a prison, right? So if we're placing people on remand in there, we've got to really think, actually, is this the option of, the last resort? The bail laws did change things. Amanda's right. Fortunately, the government was brave enough, and here's some courage from the Andrews government. They reversed those bail laws for under 18-year-olds. All right, so they changed them back to what they should have been. And that was good to see. But I think now we've got to turn our attention to, is it in our community's interests? Is it in Victoria's interests that we have so many on remand? And are there community-based bail, better bail options, and those sort of things to actually suggest that let's make remand as it was once, and that was a place of last resort. It's not tolerable for a modern society to be placing young people, adults in prison situations on non-violent offences, on offences that in fact actually, on driving offences in that regard, of which there's some capability of that. So we need to actually take the courage to say, actually, not get soft on crime, get smart on crime, and actually start to move this back in relation to some of the good options that can be alternatives to remand, and the figures do speak for themselves. I'd start one there. Two, I think that this community-based, it's not a bunch of bleeding hearts saying, come on, let's invest in the community and we're going to fix this prison thing. Seriously, what we've seen is people with opportunity will change their behaviour. I see it every day of the week here, Archbishop, with young people, young adults, given a second chance, given another opportunity, investing in their future. Now, there's a number of postcodes in which young adults and young offenders and adult offenders are saying, well, where's the opportunities here amongst this geography, amongst where I'm living? And I think we really have to take, if I could put it like this, a postcode approach to actually investing in those communities, to have these work options, to have these pathways into education options that proactively offer some of these cohorts. And we know there's some overrepresentation of a number of cohorts in prison, and target that. So, I think, it's encouraged. I'll say this finally, Archbishop. Maybe there is a silver lining for COVID. Overall, prison numbers in this state have dropped by about 11% in the last year. Probably COVID driven. And I think the government are not interested in seeing, or do understand the issues of COVID and imprisonment. We've just seen them overseas. So are not interested in sort of encouraging those sort of further incarcerations. Maybe we can use this opportunity as a way of leaning into the community-based investments, given that we've got a sort of a trend over the last 12 months, decreasing very slowly. As Amanda said, we're coming from a very high incarceration base, but decreasing as a result of concerns around COVID.
And Amanda, you've been an activist in this space for a long time. How do you keep your motivation? And are you seeing in the time you've been involved in this some real results of your advocacy? Because I guess I'm trying to understand. We've got 180 people online with us today. They might experience something that they'd like to make a difference. How can people keep focused to make a difference for some of these things? Because they are about some deeper policy issues that go beyond the headlines. They really go to the hard work of what a human society looks like, and how we actually have a vision for people being contributors and participators.
I think that conversations with the people around you, conversations with people on the tram. I know that people aren't on trams very much at the moment, but conversations to educate people are really life-changing. Having women who'd been inside, given a forum to speak, really opens people's eyes up to actually what, it's a human to human thing, what people have gone through and what has led them to where they are. What was your question about how?
Oh, just how you've kept your motivation over such a long period of commitment to your advocacy work?
Well, basically, when I was sort of working as a private lawyer, going in and doing work with women inside, one of the first things that really hit me over the head was, and this was in the days where you, as a lawyer, you could sometimes go into the cell to see your client. That was definitely last century. And I went out to see a woman, and they said to me that she'd self-harmed and she was still in her cell. Did I want to see her? And I said, well, yes, I would like to see her. And I went in, and she had a bandage on her, but there was blood everywhere. There was blood on the sheet. There was blood on the wall. And I thought, this is not humanity. Having a person who was so distressed that they harmed themselves pretty badly, and they get left in that sort of situation. This is not right. Mm. And that just made me think, people need to know about this. People need to know that this is how we treat people, and no one's going to walk out feeling great about themselves being treated like this. And then when there was the campaign to stop the prisons being privatized, that was a phenomenally wonderful campaign to be involved in. We didn't stop it, but eventually the private women's prison got handed back to the state because all of these people in the community could see, could morally see, it is not right to make a profit out of incarceration. Unions, teachers, community workers. When we had a vigil outside Fairlie Women's Prison for 8 months, so to stop women being moved from the Fairlie to Jika, but then to the private women's prison, there were all of these ordinary people who came with donuts and cakes, completely understanding what was wrong about a private prison and why women shouldn't be moved. So I found all of that very motivating. And then there was, I guess the last sort of thing I'd like to say is that I was at a visit at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, a professional sort of lawyer-client visit in the area where women were having visits with their children. And there was a young Vietnamese-speaking woman there and her 2 gorgeous children who were probably about 7 were there. And the woman was speaking in Vietnamese to her children and to her partner. And it was nearly time's up for the children's visit. And this prison officer came over and just started shouting at the children to clean up the toys. And it was quite extraordinary. There were 7 other women in the visit centre who just stood up and walked over to him and just said, "What do you think you're doing?" Shouting at these children, terrifying these children. We have the job as monitors to clean up after everybody, the visit centre. You've got no right to be shouting at these children. And, you know, that the risk that those women took in that environment, it just actually brought me to tears, because they were standing up for the rights of children, for the rights of the women that they were with, at great cost to themselves. I have no doubt there would have been consequences for them. But that sort of thing, that sort of courage and solidarity that women show amongst each other, that's really motivating.
No, thanks for sharing that, because I think, you know, anything where we tap into that heart of human energy and passion, it's very motivating for any of us, really, because you can sort of see that's really what a good society does. It taps into people's motivations. It can recognize that people can make mistakes. It looks at how people might be supported and encouraged, accompanied to make better choices. And I think that's, in a big society like ours, that relationality does get lost to a large degree. And you know, we may not have much intersection. We may not, for a lot of people, they may not encounter people. And if they do encounter it in a personal way, it's confronting and it is shocking. I know when I was a priest in Brisbane, I visited the Bogger Road jail, which was one of the old sort of Pentridge style ones that probably closed towards the end of the 1980s. And it was where my great grandfather had been incarcerated after he'd attempted suicide. And I think that was probably, like many people today, someone who had a mental health issue. But in those days, and probably you would hope not so much, but probably still some places today, the mental health issues are precipitating causes for people being incarcerated. So I suppose I'm wondering, and you know, Paul, you might have a comment on this before we open it up to some of the questions that are coming in on our question thing. You know, what are your sense of the therapeutic opportunities that are there in, you know, either in the system post-release, and how adequate are they? Because you know, we know this is a risk factor.
Well, they are. I mean, let's just look at your comment about mental health. 42% of those entering prison will have a mental health issue, Archbishop. I mean, this is not sort of a fringe population here. I mean, this is a main cohort entering prison. So we have to realize in a sense, well, what are their needs? I mean, I often think that Remand is in fact, it should be called our assessment service, because we've got them, you know, with all the respect of this use intended, in a captured environment. Let's actually see what their needs are and what they connect. What we do know is that for people to get on their feet, Archbishop, it does take a while. It's not sort of, here's a phone number, here's a one-off visit, good luck, you know, good luck with all of that. We have to be sustaining in our relationships for people to take, you know, to take those steps. As we know, if a third of those entering prison are homeless, we know that, well, we're going to have to construct some really practical, bricks and mortar options. But what we do know is, given opportunity, you'll get repaid in spades. And I think this is the thing that, you know, I haven't met someone who's done a sentence and come out who doesn't want to better themselves. I haven't met someone who's have been a heavy offender, but still underneath do want, you know, are down on themselves and do want to better themselves. I think it's our job to give opportunity. Well, and constate, sure, people are accountable for their behaviours, but I think from a service delivery perspective, it is about providing the basics, as Maslow would say, but in fact, actually giving some of those opportunities of employment, of engagement, of another chance to find your way, because the default position is very strong. So that's why we have to sort of really be quite hands-on in our pathway approach out. The second thing I'll say is this, Archbishop, and I'll say about the young offender and the young adult offender. We treat these offenders very individually, and this is what I'll say. Youth supervision order, youth parole, youth detention. No, hang on a minute. Yeah, they're young, but they're also part of a family. And that yet the system's very individually orientated. Now, what we've seen, as your questions asked, what are some of our therapeutic approaches that we've seen work? Well, we've brought family around the young offender, and not only said to the family, what's happening with Johnny or Mary here? No, so what's happening, Mum? What's happening in your life? Dad, what's happening in your life? Little bro, what's happening? And everyone becomes and they've all got issues. They've all got issues. I'm misunderstood. I'm not heard. I'm sick of them behaving, whatever. But bring that into play. What we've seen is, if we take a more, use the family as a source of strength to actually take place the pathway out of offending. And what we've seen with that type of orientation is that the young person feels like they've got their family back. The family feel like they got their son back, and everyone is participating around there. And we're starting to see that offending becomes less the norm, and that in fact some of their wins become, intoxicating, in the sense, oh, this is okay. I've got some stability in the home. I want to stay here. I want to better myself. So it is a step-by-step journey. But I think with purpose, Archbishop, with purpose, many we can actually move with them, and they will by themselves, with the right opportunities, away from this sort of circling back into prison, back into offending, back into the same old. Because many of them, and I, in my many years in this business, I know many offenders who actually go, damn, to themselves, damn. And if we got the right opportunities, I think they'd grab it and take it.
No, thanks.
Can I just say something about the mental health issue that support workers have said to me? And it's that since the NDIS has been in, there's been a real rollback of community-based mental health support and outreach mental health. There's sort of been a transfer that people thought, oh, the NDIS would, provide all of these solutions. But actually, for marginalised people, the NDIS doesn't work. It's too hard to get, too much paperwork. There really needs to be an investment in outreach mental health, in day programs that people can go to and feel safe and do things and get support. So the mental health thing, you're quite right, Paul, like 2/3 of women have mental health diagnosis in prison. It's a really significant issue. And when women get out, it's a particularly significant issue in terms of if they have to go into rooming houses or if they have to go into housing that's not safe. It's a real problem, and they need mental health long-term support and a worker to walk them through it.
And we just got, we might turn now to some of the questions coming through our chat functions, but we've got one comment there that the effect of COVID has been to limit the access to people in to give spiritual and emotional support. Some of the chaplains have had limited opportunities of visiting. So I think that there's probably a couple of effects, and I think it's just worth saying that probably even though the numbers are happily reduced in prison by, Paul said, I think 11%, the experience of being in prison during this COVID time may be a bit magnified in terms of the greater limitation on people who can come and participate in programs and other things. So I think that's just worth acknowledging that.
And family visits and children's visits.
Yeah, that'd be very important, in terms of connection. One of the other comments that is coming here is, really that it does go to that question you've been saying about life on the outside being unsupported, and the comment this person's making is particularly people with HIV or other illnesses that they're people who they've spoken to at St Vincent's Hospital where they are working just sort of found that prison gave them the support structures around circumstances they couldn't substitute easily in the outside community. And I think we probably touched on that, but any comments about that? I mean, you wouldn't want to say that our life in the broader society is so detached of support services, but for some people, it probably is very hard to access them.
Yeah, Archbishop, look, I see that comment. I must say, I haven't met that many that have said, I want to get back in. But I have met many that said, it's bloody hard being out.
Mm.
And so I think this is I think we have to remind ourselves about what locking up someone is. And I think Amanda's touched on this earlier in our conversation. I mean, for women, it's often removing the primary carer in the role and removing a range of roles that person is playing, where and particularly in COVID, where there's now no contact or very limited contact between in visitations and a number of things as a result of COVID. So I think what we want to probably ensure is that there's some rebalancing, I suppose, or maybe something rather than rebalancing, some further investment. And as I said to made a comment earlier, I think we know what to do, and I think we've got some very good examples of, in fact, success. I mentioned that what we're doing with the homeless populations at the moment as a result of COVID is really just sort of groundbreaking. It's like another paradigm, this approach. Now, it has been on again, off again, and back on. But in fact, COVID, this environment has resulted in people, bureaucrats, governments, and the community sector trying to think differently about this. And I think that what we've got to have is get that infectious amongst how we deal with some of our exiting prison populations in a more scaled way, or particularly, and I'd say not only exiting, Archbishop, but those at risk of entering, those at risk in which providing opportunity in the bail time, providing opportunity in the pre-sentencing time, really starting to invest to see if we can actually derail, what is sort of that good old, not good old, but that old train back into prison. So I suggest, it is about a post-release, but it is, I think there's a lot of gain, a lot of upside also in investment in the pre-sentence period of a young offender, give them something to compare about, oh, do I really want this sort of, again, sentence lifestyle? And so, I think that we, to answer your question, I think that there are things that we do know, and I think there's confidence in models that governments have changed. The hospital system's turned on and said, this whole screen, the way we're talking these days, it's turned on its head. So I think we can do the same in relation to our investment in the young offender, in the adult offender along the same line.
I think there's a couple of comments coming in about just relationship. Howard Hutchins has got a couple of interventions he's made there about that, and really about things being relational rather than industrial scale. And I think some other comments in the chat were coming in about, well, even are there any homestay options that that anyone's organised so that people could be part of some transitional accommodation for people post-release, and are there existing programs to encourage, I suppose, the private sector to be particularly targeting investment in housing for people that we're talking about? Any insights there about that human relational way that people who are participating today could be part of?
Well, relationships are the vehicle for change. I'm not. That's that's a no-brainer, and I think that we've got to see the relational approach is the pathway out for. Whether we're talking about the offender, whether we're talking about the homeless, it doesn't matter. We bring that consistent, sometimes persistent relationship, but that interpersonal connection, that someone feels that there's a caring adult or someone that who's prepared to sort of not talk at them, but be with them, be their consultant in that regard, if I could use such a term. The relationship is so important. But in relation to your other comment about developers or private housing sort of interests in relation to this area, certainly what we have seen, in the likes of Launch Housing, Vincent Care, a number of other housing associations, on scale, Archbishop, we're not talking about, sort of $1 million here, $1 million there, but tens of millions, really doing some serious and very interesting developments in partnership with housing associations here in Victoria to build up that stock. And I think here in Victoria, I will say that now that there's a bit of, I'd have to, we'd all agree that the government has really lent into this issue, the state. I'd have to say the feds haven't. And why haven't the feds lent into the homelessness housing issue around the country is beyond my grasp, because it's one of the highest social policy issues this country is facing: housing affordability, housing certainty. But credit to the state, credit to the Andrews government that they've put $5 billion. Now, if the feds had matched that, Archbishop, if the feds had matched the Victoria's investment, I don't reckon, and I'll say a big statement here, I don't reckon we would have a housing crisis, in the sense, if the feds had come through with another $5. They seem to be pretty quick in writing checks for submarines, but not too much about writing checks for housing affordability. So I think there's something to say to Canberra about where are you in this space? Where's your contribution to some of the housing, homeless, housing affordability issues this country's facing?
No, thank you. We've got some people online who I'm sure are good letter writers, and they'll probably good food for thought for them to be advocating to their local politicians. But Amanda,
I guess there's two issues. I might just veer quickly into housing, but I want to talk about employment. The housing big build in Victoria is really good. However, it's not really suitable often for very low income people and for people exiting prison, because there's no cap on rental. So, social and community housing can be great, but there needs to be public housing stock where there is security for the tenant and where you are not paying more than 25% of your income for rent. Because some of the social housing stock, women that flat out have been involved with, women have been excluded because they've got drug and alcohol issues, because there are family violence issues that people don't want to live around. So whilst it's great, there must be a focus on public housing. And one program, just to sort of veer on to employment, most people want to work. Most people want to have a job, because it's no fun living on, below the poverty line. A number of years ago, Toll had a fantastic scheme where they employed lots of people who had left prison. And that was really, really successful, because the thing with criminal record checks is, when you go for a job, if a lot of people don't even bother applying because they know there'll be a criminal record check, because you know that you'll be at the bottom of the queue. So actually having big businesses who can have dedicated people who work with people who are leaving prison, because people need a lot of support going back into employment, a lot of support. But like Paul said, the rewards are fantastic. Like the employer feels great because they're doing something. They're doing something that is going to change people's lives, change families' lives. So a scheme to support that is really, really important. And I saw one of the chat room people talked about small mental health programs in the community rather than, you know, big ships. And that's because it's relational. Having relationships with mental health workers, having a relationship with a family violence worker who's not going to dump you when you go back to a violent partner. Like, those sorts of things are really vital for women, because it can take a long time to move away from violence and you need a lot of support. Whereas a lot of family violence services at the moment, if you go back to a violent partner, or if you have had an intervention order taken out against you by a violent partner, like a cross-application situation, they won't work with you. And so the most vulnerable women who have experienced family violence just get pushed to the side.
Yeah, so there's obviously some quite heroic work that both goes on for people who are making the journey themselves into post-release life, but also by those who are accompanying them. And I guess we haven't sort of said it here, but there's clearly people who work in the criminal justice system who feel just as passionate to see the outcomes as good for the people they work with, given the roles they have. And it's I always just keep coming back, I suppose, to this this aspect that what you don't know, people tend to fear. I guess I lived in far north Australia, where the number of people who'd been in prison was probably disproportionately higher. It was the numbers you were saying, like the MCG numbers, because there were remote Aboriginal communities. But there was really a sense that when people were released, that they wouldn't be integrated back into their community. There wasn't a sense that criminal history was going to prejudice their participation. And it's very interesting. Some people have gone on to be celebrated by the wider community, and I'm often aware of their very unhappy criminal history that they've got, but it's not been. And I sort of wonder, because we are a society that very quickly stigmatizes people, is very anxious about things. As you say, you want to, everyone's doing a risk analysis. What will it mean if you have someone who's got you've done the criminal history check? What kind of conversations would you both suggest that if anyone listening today is an employer or is in that position, what kind of conversation should they be courageous enough to have with someone like that, who they see that criminal history when they're looking at a job application?
Well, first of all, have the conversation. Have the conversation. I'd encourage them to reach out to, even if they're not going to employ them, understand, but what happened then and where are you now? Archbishop, what happened then is not, don't assume it's the same person who's actually applied for that job to you today, I'd say to the employer. I employ staff, Archbishop, and we employ staff and they have to present their criminal record checks. And I'd say that I've employed people with criminal records in that regard. But they have said, they've spoken about that that was a time in my life when I had a lot of pressure, or things weren't going well, or I didn't feel there was opportunity. Now I'm changed, I'm different, and this is what I want. I want good, I want better for myself, and take a punt on them. And in fact, I think the criminal record checks are a very important part of making sure that we're all you know, ensuring that we're all bringing the best and operating safely and minimizing, you know, a range of possibilities. But also, it is not about an exclusion zone. It's not about not giving opportunity at the same time. So you've got to bring those two things on the paper. Sure, there's offences in which, you know, are just no-brainer no's. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about really what happened and the many instances that I've seen and listened to on situations that people have found themselves in. They've got that, they give a context, they say, this is what happened, this is what was happening. I look that in the eye and say, either I was sorry for that, or I'm a different person now, or whatever. So I think it's important that, you know, it's Amanda's example of toll is maybe to corporate Australia a message. And what we want to see from corporate Australia, from large employing businesses, about who have big workforces that set good cultures. So it's not only really sort of the guy down the local butcher's, the local shop, can you give, you know, Johnny a go, but bring these people into our large infrastructure projects and give them a go, you know, in the tunnels, in the train, in the tunnels of public transport, in a number of others, give percentages of job opportunities to a young adult offending cohort, whatever. You'll find that the work cultures starts to get that new employee sort of belonging to that, enjoying that. So, you know, I always think there's another side to the story than what you're reading that you've got to hear, and then you make your judgment there.
Good. Amanda, any wisdom to those who are in that situation of making these choices?
It's about the conversation, which Paul just said, because often people are, you know, too afraid or embarrassed or think the other person's going to feel bad about it. It really is about having the courage to have the conversation and asking people what's different for them now that is going to make it easier for them to move ahead without maybe using again, without maybe gambling again. What things have they put in place, or what things have been put in place to sort of move them through? And for employers, it's really important not to just dump people in the big end, in the deep end. There needs to be, you know, we talked about, like with post-release, you need to have a worker probably for 2 years who's walking side by side, mentoring or whatever. There needs to be, in a big company, actually somebody who can mentor people who are going back into the workforce. It could be someone who's been inside themselves. You know, once a company can establish a history of having people working with them who have been, you know, got a criminal record, you can train people to be mentors, to make sure that if a person feels like they can't come to work for 3 days because something's going on, that you actually need to ring somebody up and say you're not coming, not just not turn up, because otherwise you'll lose your job. So it's really about educating employers about how best to work with people who might have a checkered work history, might not have had a job before, might have only had really not great jobs before. And, you know, going legit is a whole new world that you've got to enter into, and that is scary. And people don't want to say, you know, do the wrong thing and make mistakes. So if they feel like things are going out of control, they will step to the side rather than ask for help.
I think that in so many areas of life, it's that opportunity of participation, the sense of value anyone gets about participating, feeling they're making an impact, is experiencing the affirmation of making a difference to other people, being a valued colleague, whatever it is. You know, there is just so much, you might call it protective factors that gives to people in a whole lot of areas of their own, their mental health, their participation, their economic security. And I think we've properly emphasized the disadvantage, the kind of circumstances that can be part of a young person's life that really they struggle to get past. And I suppose just as some closing words, Paul, where would you like to leave us in our thoughts today, just about that way in, and what we can do and what we can be aware of for young people, because some of the people on this will be an older generation, might kind of think that the young people today aren't what they used to be.
Well, yeah, that's right. Or some of the older people might say, "Oh man, when I used to do it really, really, really badly." So it's either way. You're gonna get some. It looks like someone's chosen to actually have a pneumatic drill right in the middle of it. So I hope you can hear me saying something here. I'll say it quickly because I don't know where this drill's come from, and it's certainly not renovating behind us. That's all well built, folks. I will say this: that don't. We've talked today about some larger issues and big trends, Archbishop, and prison and numbers and millions of dollars and people. Don't underestimate the thing that you can do, the little thing, the reaching out, the giving opportunity, or a letter, or giving someone who has, who hasn't had a kind word all day. It doesn't matter. Every little bit helps. I think COVID's the time for the little stuff. I'd have to say they're the important things, the unexpected reach out, the unexpected look. I've been thinking about you, and I know someone who I used to work with. I'm retired now, but his son's running a business, and I might give him those sort of things. I mean, it's about creating chance. And it's also doing what we can do rather than being overwhelmed by, some of the trends and the issues and the stories. Everyone has a part to play, and I think everyone can make a difference. It doesn't matter what situation you're in. And that's my sort of where I'd leave it. That believe that you can make a difference, and it can be very simple, very informal. But, if we're all doing our little bit, then maybe we'll see some of this big stuff change.
And Amanda, some concluding words from you that might encourage those who are participating today to look at life differently, or look at people in the criminal justice system differently.
Well, I'm really inspired by young people's activism today, by their creativity, by their courage. If just sort of, this isn't social justice, but this is about the world we live in. The work people are doing environmentally, that young people are doing environmentally, is incredibly inspiring. The work that the family of Tanya Day did, the First Nations sort of Black Lives Matter young people, incredibly inspiring. Expiring is the wrong word, isn't it? Inspiring. And we just got to listen. We've got to listen to these people about what their experiences are. And I think you said, we fear what we don't know. Well, we can find things out by listening to other people, by reading what they write, and by, practicing, what you were saying before about, you never know where a kind word can go. You never know where a small chance can go. And, that's really how we should be trying to live our lives.
Well, thanks, Amanda, and thank you, Paul. Really important topic. I'm glad we got there in the end. We'd had a few dates booked at Federation Square, and every time we'd come close to it, we had to not proceed because of all the lockdown restrictions. But it's such an important topic. I didn't want to see it just slip past and get lost in COVID. So I hope we've opened it up, hopefully, for all of you who've been good enough to dial in online, responded to the opportunities of your questions and comments. And if you were here, I'd ask you to give a big round of applause and appreciate Paul and Amanda, but I'm sure I can feel that coming through the radio waves. So I might just conclude with this brief prayer. as I pray for all who live and work in the prisons and correctional facilities in Victoria. Lord God, we pray for the safety of prisoners, the connections with their families to be strong and prosper, and for hope for the future to abound. And help us all to be part of making good policy decisions that encourage the flourishing of all people, especially those who are involved or at risk of involvement in the criminal justice system. And so we pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who reached out to the discouraged, the marginalized and the poor, that we might do the same in our day. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll let you know when our next opportunity will be. And Amanda, every strength in your work, and Paul, you too. Hope all keeps well, and hope everyone has a great day. And it's as sunny where you are as it is where Paul and I happen to be. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Archbishop.
Thanks,
Thank you, Paul.
Bye.